What stood out for me for this testing, man? Everyone is talking is like, yes, Mercedes will come around, will make a difference, will change what they need to change. Um, but man, dude, they didn't look good. In fact, I heard one couple F1 commentators said this is the worst they looked since 2004. I'm sorry, 2014 when they introduced the hybrid era.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
don't know if you saw something different or you saw something, at least a silver lining in this cloud of mystery they have right now. Or
yeah. I mean, there's a couple things for me. I think the first thing is it's Mercedes. I mean, they'll figure it out. Their engineers are phenomenal. I'll also say if you look at last year, which is just kind of an interesting reference point, I guess. If you look at last year, Stroll, Fiat, and Giovinazzi figure they finished fourth, fifth, and sixth. So yeah, I don't really know that testing is a super big indicator of where people are going to land.
well, that's a good point because I was going to say this as a caveat or disclaimer. It's testing. It's not the season. It's going to change.
Right,
Um,
right,
in the last, I think, 10, 15 years, um, I think there was only twice that the team that won testing won the championship, and one of them was last year with Mercedes winning the testing last season. But between 2015 and 2019, the winners were Ferrari.
right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should be understated at all. I think Red Bull definitely made a statement. They came in and were pretty dominant. When you look at them compared to their real rival, they were almost a 1 second, so a little bit more than 1 second ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So I mean it's not nothing, right? It's not something worth ignoring. So I don't think we can just kind of throw it out completely. They still have to figure out how to make up a second. Obviously, Red Bull's still going to be getting better during that time period. So again, it's not worth discounting, but I do think that it's not a full indication of where people are going to land if we just look historically at how testing has played out throughout the season.
this is true, but one thing that stood out for me, but first, I'm going to go by the laps per team. Alfa Romeo had the most, as well as Alfa Tauri, 422. Ferrari
Yeah.
had 104. Alpine had 396. Two behind that was Haas. Williams had 373. Red Bull had 369 at number seven. McLaren at 327. Aston Martin at 314. And Mercedes was last at 304. Now, if you break it down per team, the fastest, of course, as you said, was Red Bull. But I want to see this. Not even half a second behind him was Yuki Tsunoda and AlphaTauri. That I think, I mean, once again, testing, but this blew my mind. And we were going to do constructors later on, and we had this discussion yesterday as far as who we're going to put in the constructor standings. And I had to make a swap for my standings because of what Yuki did. This is unbelievable. This is what stood out for me, not necessarily Mercedes, but what Yuki did. And granted, the first two days it wasn't all too well, but I think that's a silver lining right there for AlphaTauri.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, we're talking offline about just like what he's been able to do, or what he's meant to the sport even already. It's been really fun to see him come in and bring a fresh energy. I think that'll probably be the biggest thing that he does this season. AlphaTauri, in my predictions, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. I know, but in my prediction, they'll end up somewhere in the middle. But yeah, this is definitely fun. I mean, it's super exciting to see something like that play out in testing, especially from one of the newest drivers.
Well, absolutely. I was going to break down per team, but first off, now Gasly didn't do bad. He actually helped out the team, but I mean, what AlphaTauri gave Yuki Tsunoda, I mean, I don't know. I was just blown away, and I'm becoming a fan of his right now because he's so humble. So I mean, he can make fun of himself all the time. We talked about this earlier, what he said on Twitter and stuff like that, and we'll go into it. But I'm just I don't know. I just have, and once again, I said this a couple weeks ago. The mid tier for me, it could go any way. Any team in the mid tier could go anyway for the season for me. So that was hard for me. The hardest part was the mid tier, trying to pick who was going to be what. But I just see something special from Yuki and AlphaTauri. I know he probably wants to move up into the Red Bull team, but I think he can really help AlphaTauri at least for this season and next season.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think this says about Gasly?
Well, that's a
I
good
mean,
question.
because you said he didn't finish bad, but I mean, he finished in 12th, which is also not good.
Not great, but that's a good question. I'm going to defer to someone else. No, I'm picking. Um, no, it's yeah, but that shows that Gasly, and we talked about this last week too with Gasly and mid tier, how he won last season, be on the podium and stuff like that is because of all what other happened to the other teams. The other teams got crash penalties and stuff like that. That's how he moved up. Gasly is a good mid tier driver, a good mid tier driver. When we go down in history, I don't think he'll be remembered as one of the best in Formula One, but I think he will be remembered as something that it's just a good driver. I mean, with
It almost makes you wonder, like how long his career will be. I mean, because he is one of those that he could have. Um, he could have, just a long career in one of the lower tier teams, right? Like one of the third tier teams,
right,
and just be kind of at worst a reserve driver, at best number two. I mean, he's proven he can't be a number two, at least right now, on a first tier team because he had that seat. But yeah, I mean, maybe he could be a number two for a number of years. Maybe like a Grosjean. I mean, Grosjean's. I don't know that he's had a good season in 10 years. Before he left.
I think his highlights were back when Vettel was champion. He was able to get in the podium more with Lotus Grosjean. But yeah, to your point, it's just, and I got a feeling if Gasly can't make it too well in Formula One, he might do um, what Grosjean did and just go to IndyCar. That's what some.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what
Yeah,
some.
it might be that, or if he stays in F1. I mean,
Yeah.
when it with Grosjean, I mean, we're talking about like it's been a proper 8 to 10 years of no wins,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like 0 wins. So it is possible to be, not a first-rate driver. I mean, first-rate in the world for sure, but to still stay in Formula One for a long time. I think a lot of it nowadays is going to depend more on sponsorships.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what his support structure looks like, but if he's got a lot of support by way of sponsorships, then maybe he can sneak in there for quite a while. He could have a long career. Otherwise, I think he'll just kind of be a driver that's around for a couple seasons. Maybe like well, I mean he's still young too, which is hard, but I mean we've had a lot of drivers that were like that. Maybe like an Ericsson who was there for 3 years or so, and then just kind of went to Indy.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to Ferrari. Now they had 404 laps, which is dominated by Carlos. Now, understandably, Carlos will have more laps because Charles is already there. He knows Ferrari. I mean, granted, it's a new power unit for them in a way, but Carlos was able to get Ferrari into the third position for testing. Um, do you see a silver lining for Ferrari this season because of this, or it's just going to be the same old, same old?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a pretty clear picture of where they'll end up based on where they started out, as far as how they started talking about the season. I think that obviously in testing, it wasn't terrible.
Mhm.
It wasn't terrible. It wasn't as bad as maybe we were expecting. A number three slot is super legit, but I think ultimately they'll wind up, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think ultimately they'll wind up maybe, yeah, again, somewhere in the middle, but not at the top of the pack.
I do agree. I think, I mean, this helps Ferrari, honestly, having Carlos there. And I pointed out a couple weeks ago that those two, Charles and Carlos, will help each other. They're probably one of the best driver pairings. Now, also looking at it now, Carlos in the past hasn't run well too well with his other driver pairing, but however, this helps push Charles to become a better driver, better than he already is. Now, you could say the same that he did that, or Vettel did that for him, but um, I think there's more of a relationship there with Carlos that Charles has than he had with Vettel, and so I
Yeah,
think
I think part of that's probably just an age thing, right? Like they're part of the same generation. Vettel, I think he was in a place where he was just doing his own thing. I mean, he's won 4 world championships. He's I think he's just in a different place. I don't think the relationship was the same. To your point,
yeah,
I don't think it was the same.
I think it was, and to your point too, I think Ferrari move up in the state. I mean, last year was horrible for them. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah,
other teams that finished below them, but honestly, for Ferrari, this is probably going to be their worst season they will have in a while, in my opinion. So this will probably wake them up. Um, and try to push it because I know Charles was better last season, and it hurt him.
yeah. I mean, no, go ahead.
It hurt him that that he finished that Ferrari finished where he finished. So he's hungry. Carlos is hungry. I think this really helps promote Ferrari into that upper mid tier, lower upper tier bracket again.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's kind of the tale of 2 seasons, because while Ferrari had an awful season from a performance metric standpoint, um, I mean they also made money, right? And they were one of the biggest money makers, right behind Mercedes for last season. So yeah, it's kind of the tale of 2 seasons. Was it a poor season from a performance standpoint? I don't think that's really debatable. But was the season not worth it, or like a complete wash when you think about what the entire function of this whole thing is? It is an entertainment um, thing that is a vehicle to make money, right? So
Right.
it was profitable. It made money. So I wouldn't say that it was a completely terrible season, but I mean, from a fan standpoint, it wasn't great. If if you're a fan of Ferrari,
Um, yeah, it reminds me. I've been a Saints fan, a New Orleans Saints fan for American football here for many, many, many years. And I remember growing up, it's like even before the season started, well, there's always next season. There's always next year. So I think they was hoping for Ferrari for, well, there's always next season. There's always next year. We'll see about that.
yeah,
Um, move on to Alfa Romeo, who came in actually second, but they had the most laps. Actually, Kimi was the one that helped them out there with uh, put in a time of 129.766. That is not too bad, but once again, it's Alfa Romeo. And you pointed out last week that Alfa Romeo, uh, Giovanni isn't that great. Kimmy, this might be his last season, so he's probably just there for the paycheck. Um, and for me, and once again, we're going to get the constructors later on. I mean, this might be the silver lining to the season they're going to have finishing.
You're saying where Kimmy finished?
Yeah, they finished in fourth.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they probably feel pretty good right now.
Right now.
But right, but I don't know that they'll feel as good after the first race.
Mm-hmm.
I think things will.
I'm a little surprised how Williams finished up, and once again, caveat is it's testing, but they finished sixth with George Russell finishing a 130.177, which is a full second off of Max's time. Um, Not bad, but once again, not great. But if I see a silver lining out of them, they were in the middle of the pack, not with just the fastest lap, but also with laps competed by team with a 373, and they really try to push that car as much as possible during testing. So I see something better out of them over the next weeks coming ahead, especially with George Russell. Um, and they may actually finish where they finished in testing over the season at number six. I'm not going to say that, but they may.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough because they finished ahead of Ricardo,
Mm-hmm.
Lando, and Leclerc. I mean, those are kind of like the big ones. I mean, Alonso maybe, but I would say finishing again ahead of Leclerc, ahead of Ricardo, and ahead of Norris just kind of shows you, and ahead of Bottas.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it just kind of shows you how skewed the data is.
Yeah. Now the first 2 days,
Yeah.
McLaren came out strong, but they finished in seventh position in testing. Um, Now that's not going to say how they're going to finish the season, but that right there also doesn't look too great on McLaren finishing at seventh. But from what I'm understanding in the garages right now, they're making tweaks to that engine, so hopefully they'll have it by next week in Bahrain.
You want to get into how we see the season shaking out?
If you want to go
Seems
that
like
way.
a good. Well, seems like a good transition, just because we're talking about where they are right now, and I'm super curious to see where you landed for where everyone's going to land.
Before we do that, I just want to go back to Mercedes just for a second, and we talked about this offline as well. It's what Toto Wolff said, and in a quote, found a hair in the soup during testing. So they found the problem,
Mm-hmm.
they need to fix. Um, Now, Hamilton also said we're just not that quick enough, and there's a lot of work to do before the first race. And what Mike pointed out was like last week or the week before of Tom Brady. I remember when Tom Brady used to go on these press conferences, just like last season. He said, Drew Brees and the Saints are fantastic. They're a great team. We got to really do our work. He said that almost about every single team going to a press conference. And when we made those press conferences, I'm like, oh God, he's going to win. He just has that boldness, confidence right there. It come off as humble and stuff like that. I don't know if you see the same thing from Hamilton. He says, we're not that quick enough. We got so much more work to do.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in previous episodes too, because it's such a hallmark of what that team is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Toto has said up until just before the last race, when they were both winning the drivers and constructors, that look, it's not over yet. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot ahead of us. The other teams are competitive. I mean, it doesn't feel super real. It kind of feels like what like the major tech companies do when they're trying to avoid antitrust. They go, oh, like, yeah, we got a lot of no, we got a lot of competition. There's competition everywhere, right? And really, all they've done is just like, segment their business, and maybe they have competition in the smartphone market, but in their core business, they don't have real competition. And so, yeah, maybe they'll lose some points to Red Bull, but when it comes to the constructors, I think it's a monopoly. I don't. I think the season will shake out and show that.
Well, before we move on, I want you to get what stood out for you, good or bad? What stood out for you the most this past weekend?
Mm, I'll be honest. I don't put a ton of weight in testing. I think that it is exactly what it's meant to be, which is just teams get a chance to get out on the track and see what they can do, weigh themselves up against other teams. But I mean, even if we look directly at last season, and where teams and individual drivers finished at the end of at the end of testing, it's just not a fair indication of how the season will ultimately come to pass. So I don't put a ton of weight in it. I think that it was the most fun part of it was probably just seeing Yuki do so well. Verstappen is that's a predictable outcome. I also think that it was fun seeing Kimi do well. Right, it's always fun to see a former world champion get out there and put up some quick times in a car that you wouldn't necessarily think could do something like that. So that was pretty fun too. But I would say the biggest story for me and the most fun one, and I think most people agreed. Everybody else was on the same boat, I think, with just like being excited about Yuki and talking about it.
Well, in short, basically, you're thinking this is preseason.
Yeah, it's the preseason. It doesn't count.
Yeah, well, it doesn't. Yeah, it's just an indicator of what was coming up and stuff like that. And once again, they'll fix it. And there's like rumors that Mercedes was sandbagging during the weekend. I mean, granted, of all seasons to do it, but
I mean, those rumors are going to happen when you're Mercedes, right? Like if you're anyone else, you're just terrible. You just didn't do well. If you're Mercedes, it's there's a reason, and they're intentionally not doing well, right? Like that's the difference in performance. So yeah, we talked about it before. They found the proverbial hair in this tube, and they'll figure it out. Seems they already have.